Well, we are all familiar with the Canadian flag, the iconic red and white and the maple leaf. It's been wrapped around Olympic athletes after they win gold. It's pinned on the lapel of new Canadians as they take their oath of citizenship. It has been stitched to many a backpack as young Canadians head out into the world. But in recent years, the Canadian flag and what it represents has shifted for some people. From the discovery of unmarked graves at former residential school sites to the ever present Canadian flag on trucks during the Freedom Convoy, what it means to be patriotic has shifted for some people. Well, today on Blue Sky, we want to hear from you. Has your view of the Canadian flag changed over time? If it's changed, what is it? What has changed for you? And what caused the change? Now, leading up to Canada Day, we at CBC wanted to know about people in Saskatchewan's attitude toward the flag and whether it's changed over time. We worked with the University of Saskatchewan to do a survey. Jason DeSano is director of the Canadian Hub for Applied and Social Research at the University of Saskatchewan, and he's with us now to walk us through the results of the survey. Hello, Jason.
Hi, Garth.
Jason, how many people were surveyed and how were people reached?
Yeah, so we surveyed 430 people right across Saskatchewan, and this was a survey that was conducted online through the web.
And what kind of questions did you ask people?
So we asked, just thinking about sort of where we're at coming into the summer and Canada Day celebrations, we thought it would be interesting to ask sort of a Saskatchewan resident series of questions around their thoughts and feelings around Canada Day and the Canadian flag, and whether their thoughts and feelings around both of those topics have changed over the last 2 or 3 years.
And what did you find out?
Yeah, so what we found really interesting. We found that most people indicated that they're going to attend a Canada Day celebration. So about 6 of 10 Saskatchewan residents indicated they're gonna do something on Canada Day this year. When asked about the Canadian flag, 80% of Saskatchewan residents actually indicated that they feel favorably when they think about the flag, and two-thirds of those, so two-thirds of Saskatchewan residents who were surveyed, indicated that they really have no change in feelings towards the Canadian flag in recent years. But about a quarter of those surveyed indicated that their feelings towards the Canadian flag have changed towards the negative recently.
Anything there that surprised you?
To be honest, not overly. I mean, I think there has been quite a bit of discussion and debate both on social media and in the media itself around the Canadian flag and the impact on things like both the government policy and things like the Freedom Convoy on the Canadian flag. I can't say though that these results were overly surprising in terms of people's feelings towards the flag.
Was there any big difference in the breakdown between urban versus rural or male versus female or age?
So interestingly enough, there weren't any differences in there. So we actually did look at differences in the results by a variety of different demographic categories, like you had mentioned, age, gender, education. The only instances where we actually found differences in the results were by either one's political stance, so whether they tend to be left-leaning versus right-leaning, and also by age, so younger versus older residents. So in terms of sort of one's political leanings, respondents who indicated that they sort of have a left-leaning political stance, so it tend to be those in the province in Saskatchewan who would say vote for the NDP, they're less likely than others in the province to indicate that they're going to attend a Canada Day celebration. They're less likely than others on the political spectrum to disagree that we should stop celebrating Canada Day. They're more likely than others on the political spectrum to agree that celebrating Canada Day is hurtful to Indigenous peoples. And lastly, they're less likely to agree that people have become too sensitive with respect to the Canadian flag and Canada Day celebration. So those are really interesting differences by sort of one's political leanings.
Now, I know this time you actually recorded some of the responses of people who did change their attitude toward the flag. What were some of the responses people gave you?
Yeah, so it depends. The kinds of responses that we received really varied based on whether their sort of perceptions of the flag have become more favorable versus less favorable. But among those where they indicated sort of their perception of flags has become less favorable, most of those who indicated it was less favorable, actually two-thirds of those, yeah, reference sort of the freedom convoy or anti-vaccination stances as sort of hijacking or co-opting the flag, and indicating that that's sort of inconsistent with their views and beliefs of what Canada should be. In terms of those where their feelings have become more favorable, similarly, about two-thirds generally reference pride in the country, the strong national Canadian identity, and Canadian values that align with their own value system.
So I suppose it's no big surprise in this province that there were mixed perspectives on the role of the flag during and because of the Freedom Convoy.
Yes, it wasn't. I mean, that particular response wasn't surprising, and I'll mention it wasn't surprising to see the extent to which, particularly among those where the perception of the flag has become unfavorable over the last little bit, that has been sort of a primary driver or motivator of their change in sort of favorability regarding the flag.
At the end of the day, though, you asked people if they were proud to be Canadian. What did you hear?
Yeah, in general, people feel like they're proud to be Canadian, and yeah, that particular response wasn't surprising at all, Garth. I mean, at the end of the day, I think people generally can put their differences aside and look and see that Canada's a great place to live and raise a family, and I think that really sort of bears itself out in these results.
All right, Jason, thanks so much for your help.
Thanks, Garth.
Bye.
Take care.
Jason DeSano is director of the Canadian Hub for Applied and Social Research at the University of Saskatchewan. Well, the CBC's Ashria Duda hit the streets of Saskatoon to ask people about their views of the Canadian flag.
I still, have strong feelings about the flag itself. It's been the flag that has been of my generation. So, I feel patriotic towards it.
I'm really not from Canada, but I guess I'm really looking forward to Canada Day and see how, the celebration goes on.
I don't know. I think in the past few years, maybe there's been some, Canadian pride things that might be controversial and have caused some tensions. So sometimes it's been used in ways that maybe aren't as inclusive as it should be for Canada as a country. Everyone, being all part of the same team here in Canada. So I'm, still excited to see the Canadian flag around on Canada Day, but I think there's definitely been some tension around it over the past few years. People can use flags however they want, but at the end of the day, that's still the flag of our country, and yeah.
I just love that I'm in Canada. When I think of other places, I still love it. Even though it has its faults, I still love it.
Thank you. How do you feel about the Canadian flag? Okay,
I love the Canadian flag, as a matter of fact. Makes me feel good.
I love the Canadian flag. I love what it resembles. It's a part of our culture. I'm an immigrant here, and I love being part of Canada.
How do you feel about the Canadian flag?
I like the Canadian flag. That's a lot of meaning.
What does it mean to you?
To me it means peace. It means freedom.
Maple leaf. It's a sign of growth. Love it. Do you love it, Mom?
I love the Canadian flag.
Yeah, we're very
I
proud
love our
of it.
country. It's great.
And it was used by protesters and convoy protests, and other people use it in different ways.
Yeah.
Does that change your opinion or perspective about it?
When I see it now, I do think of the protesters and maybe the second meaning behind it, but we will never hang it upside down or step on it or anything. This country was founded on really good things and on freedom, and to us it still means freedom.
That was the CBC's Ashwara Duda asking some folks how they feel about the Canadian flag. What do you think? What do you think about when you see the Canadian flag? How does it make you feel? Has your perception of the flag and its meaning changed at all over the last few years? Let's hear from Marcel in Prince Albert. Hi, Marcel.
Hey, Garth. How are you doing?
Pretty well, thanks. What are your thoughts today on the flag?
Yeah, I guess the first thing is just to say thanks to your program with regards to the appropriateness of having this topic on so close to Canada Day. But as I was saying to the person who has put me through, I've served in the military. I just retired, almost 37 years, and 11 of that was living in Ottawa. And when I talk to people about Canada, and because I am a very proud Canadian, having worn the flag on my uniform every day going to work, and having attended Canada Day up on Parliament Hill, which is just phenomenal, is, I tell anybody that listens to me with regards to Canada and Canada Day that going to Ottawa on Parliament Hill is something that everyone should experience at least once in their life, because it is incredible. I also lived in Ottawa just before retiring during the Freedom Convoy, and I know with the interviews that were done, there was a bit of emphasis with regards to how does that make you feel, and it's funny because the human character, other than being interrupted and listening to the horns when I was in Ottawa and not being able to move around in the streets, but when you'd see the Canadian flag flying, it just brought a real angry feeling, and it was unnatural. And I'm thinking, geez, how can I be angry at the Canadian flag? And it was a really unfortunate sentiment, but that's behind us now. And the fact that we're talking about this, I think, is a positive step.
Well, Marcel, what made you mad, the flag or how it was being used?
What they were using the flag for. And, an example I give is as everybody's being diverted, there was a minivan that sort of passed me. Everybody's honking horns, and, you get a lot of these truckers with these big, huge flags. But I saw this little kid poke the flag out of the minivan, and I'm saying, what are we doing to our kids with regards to the indoctrination associated with, I would say the hatred that was sort of projected over that time frame. But having said that, I think time heals, and we're certainly in a better place, I think, with regards to the Canadian flag, and discussions like this on your program are certainly beneficial with regards to helping that.
What do you feel now when you see the flag, Marcel? Given your history, and you mentioned that you were in Ottawa during the protests. We're going to see the flag all over the place on Saturday. What is it going to mean to you?
Yeah, nothing but pride, and the sacrifices of many that have fought for that flag, and for what it means with regards to the greatness of this country. My last 6 years before retiring, I spent serving in NATO, both in Belgium and in the UK, and I deal with a lot of the nations. And when you talk about Canada, and when people know you're from Canada, it just brings a smile to their face. And I think that's the reputation that we have as Canadians. And it's and it just makes you feel good, because we do have a great country. And then coming back here, you realize how fortunate we are when you do live out of country for different periods of time.
Marcel, thanks so much for calling in, and thanks for the conversation.
Yeah, you bet. You're welcome, and happy Canada Day.
And to you, sir. All right, folks, and again, our conversation today is about the Canadian flag and how it makes you feel, and whether those feelings have changed over the course of the last couple of years. Fascinating to hear from Marcel, a recently retired veteran of the Canadian Armed Forces, about how his perception of the flag changed back and forth over the course of the last couple of years. Now, our guest for the remainder of Blue Sky today is Heather Nicol. She's the director of the School for the Study of Canada and Canadian and First Nation Let me start that again. She's director of the School for the Study of Canada and Canadian Studies and the Frost Centre for Canadian Studies and Indigenous Studies at Trent University. She recently wrote an article for The Conversation about the Canadian flag and how it's been used as a political symbol, and she joins us now. Heather, thanks so much for taking time for us today.
Well, thank you for having me, Garth. I appreciate the invitation.
You've been listening to the program so far. You heard the survey results of how Saskatchewan people view the flag. Anything stand out for you?
I think I think it's interesting. When I wrote the article, it was in the midst of the Freedom Convoy, and I was unsure of what that event would do to the way people thought about the flag, and whether there was irretrievable damage or by association with some of the other symbols and the messages and the politicization of that symbol. And it's interesting. I'm not surprised still that there's tremendous support, but I'm also not surprised that it has opened sort of a crevice for sort of rethinking. Not this flag itself as or its symbolism in that sense, but rethinking perhaps that it might not be as inclusive for everyone, and really trying to understand what inclusivity means in Canadian society in a calmer way than certainly we were thinking about it during the Freedom Convoy. So I think it's raised for me what I think is interesting about the survey results is that there has, and some of the comments from that were taken from people on the street, is that this notion of what do we do with a symbol to make sure that it's inclusive and representative of all Canadians? How do we do that, and how do we have that conversation? I do think it's a important conversation to have.
Well, obviously, some people feel that the Freedom Convoy and the protests surrounding it and taking place around the country somehow co-opted the flag.
Mhm.
To see it thrown upside down is makes some people very angry. What are your thoughts on that feeling among some that somehow the flag's been co-opted? I've talked to people that are embarrassed to fly it because they don't
Mhm.
want to be identified with a certain
Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
group.
I understand that, and I certainly felt that way, and it was the associate. Once you have see the flag associated with some of the other flags and symbols, that were also flown, ones that we would associate with. Um, Far right or extremist positions. You can't unsee that. The message is there, and it's a complicated message, and certainly I think makes us. It made me think. I felt to some extent, yes, it was being co-opted because the flag was being used against the flag. It wasn't that, and I think rightly so. There are flags of resistance that people will fly, and you know, um, as an opposite message, perhaps to the flag of any state or the Canadian flag or any group that doesn't agree or is opposed to the symbols of state. But it's not very often you have the flag of the state flown against the flag of the state. You have the people on the street flying the flag as a message of opposition to the flag flying over Parliament Hill. So I think that was a very justifiable reaction. And I know we still have that reaction now. I think when you see, apologies to some people that might be offended, but when you see flags being flown on cars around town with signs, and we recognize that that's a different message, that's the sort of extremist position that flag again is being used in a way to co-opt the flag of unity. It's being used as a flag of division, right? So I don't know if that quite makes sense to people, but I see it as it was kind of a sneaky, underhanded way uh, to really create division. And I do understand why people still have a aversion, and it really depends who you are
Mhm.
and what you've been through in your life, and what your where you position yourself in Canadian society, and what your experience has been. And for some people, the experience of the state hasn't been happy. And for some people, it's not warm and fuzzy and shiny when they see the flag. It doesn't bring them to a good place. But there are people that certainly do see the flag, and as the previous caller spoke about, and as many people said on the street, from your interviews on the street, that it does evoke that reaction. So I just think we have to be mindful that you can't insist that everybody see a symbol the same way, and that there's one way to read a symbol, right? There
Mhm.
always that we're always going to have some division.
Okay, let's hear from Perry on the line in Prince Albert. Hi, Perry.
Hi, how are you?
I'm well, Perry. Go ahead.
I'm just kind of perplexed. I guess the question could be answered in two ways. I grew up basically born early 60s, kind of post-war generation. Everybody worked hard. Everybody accomplished lots. We moved Canada forward quite radically in many comfortable ways. We're all a very comfortable country. But what seems to have happened with the Canadian flag is what used to be a pride and symbol and an icon that came about in a very short time. The Canadian flag could probably be recognized by more countries than anybody in the world, and vice versa. We couldn't recognize the flag of Uganda. So it is an icon in a very short time. But what has hurt the Canadian flag's reputation is the politics. I mean, Canada isn't about the Liberal government. It isn't about the Progressive Conservatives or the NDP. It's about a country that has been established through partnerships with the natives that were here ahead of us, and what all we've accomplished together. And then this freedom protest thing that keeps coming up, we keep pinning the idea that the flag was being flown as a protest. Yes, it was. But it was flown also as a pride, as these Canadians didn't want to become Americans, and they weren't flying American flags. And these other ideas that Nazi flags are being flown and Confederate flags, you're always going to get some fringe people moving in on protests, and it happens on both sides. So it doesn't. We rarely can account for that. The intent of the freedom protest was to fly the Canadian flag with pride, to say we're Canadians and we shouldn't have our rights trampled on. Now, that is an opinion of a certain group of people. It's not everybody. And I'm not saying it was right or wrong, but we have a right to demonstrate. And then what seemed to have occurred is now we say, well, they were flying the Canadian flag in protest of the Canadian flag. I think they were flying the Canadian flag in protest of what the political establishment has done with it. It's using it as a green Visa card to just go out and push policies all over the world, but also on us Canadians. We're a free country. Every citizen that's come here is a free citizen from any country, and they're welcome. And that's what makes Canada special, and that's why the flag will always be pride to me, but it is now becoming controversial because of how it's being labeled. And I disagree with the people that are labeling it. They just call it a pride, an icon, and we'll move forward, and our reputation will change over the years, and our Canadian flag will still fly strong among the United Nations.
Right. Perry, thanks so much for taking part today.
You bet.
Okay, the Santos Cardoza family fled Honduras 10 years ago and eventually settled in Moosomin, Saskatchewan. In 2017, they faced deportation, but the community rallied around the family and that deportation order was dropped. The family became Canadian citizens earlier this year. Their son, Victor, has become a prominent leader in his community. He was awarded a citizenship award recently. Our CBC Blue Sky producer, Nicole Huck, caught up with the 18-year-old Victor Santos Cardoza yesterday and asked him what the flag means to him.
When you look at the flag, what are the words that it evokes for you?
Well, I guess equality, some words, strength too, right? The strength we have from such a diverse population of different backgrounds. I think that's what makes it so unique, right? Canada's one of those countries where we're a mix of such a diverse population. It's not just one. Multiple people from different regions around the world. Unity, right? We're unified together, and I think, it represents many great things in all honesty.
Do you plan on celebrating Canada Day?
Absolutely, yeah. Try my best.
What do you plan on doing?
Well, being surrounded around family and being reminded of what this country has offered us, right? Of, it's staying humble and remember that, we wouldn't be where we are because of the great people of this country and the great government, and that we belong here just as much as anybody else, and take time to reflect that.
A lot of people have used the word freedom when it comes to the flag. When you think of the word freedom in association with the flag, what do you think of?
Well, freedom, from my perspective, it means the ability to be who you are, do what you want to do, right? I guess for me, from coming from a country that's very limited on freedom, right? Having such a limited say, limited choice. For me, this freedom means absolutely everything, right? Like being an individual, right? Being your own individual, having a say, right? Having an impact, necessarily. Most importantly, I mean, and especially for me and around this community, having such a big impact. I That's what really freedom means to me in this country, right? Getting that, getting that choice to do what you want, and and how you spent your time. And
I don't know how much you were paying attention. You're in Moosomin. You probably, I don't know if the Freedom Convoy came through Moosomin.
Yeah.
But, like the Canadian flag was a really big symbol of the Freedom Convoy. What do you make of how you saw the flag being used?
I think it was represented really good, honestly. The truckers, they were standing up for what Canada was, right? And obviously those truckers, they're the backbone of this country. They're getting us all of our products and all of our food, right to our doorsteps. And I think when they used that flag, they represented it, just right. They weren't only just fighting, for themselves, but they were fighting for the rest of the country. And me personally, like I said, freedom was just that, that choice of now doing, what I want to do, and then where I spent my time and how I spent my time, and the things I can say and do. For me, from coming from very little freedom, I can say I have a pretty fair grasp of what it is now, but like compared to others, it may be completely different. But
Oftentimes on Canada Day celebrations, it's people who are new to Canada who are probably the most patriotic. It's the people who are have all the Canada lawn chairs and the Canada T-shirts and have the flags. Why do you think that people who are new to Canada are so patriotic?
Well, I think it's mainly because this country gave them another opportunity. We, as immigrants, we typically move from these countries even to get a second chance, to get a new start in life, to escape whatever it was from their home country, terror, poverty. I think, and as immigrants, all we want to do is provide, like safety and freedom for our families. And so when we get a country like Canada, such a beautiful country, by the way, we get a country like Canada welcoming us with open arms and accepting us as one, regardless of culture, race, skin color, ethnicity. Accepting us as one of their own. Obviously, we're gonna come ahead and turn around and represent this country to our absolute fullest. Because we as immigrants, I'm not sure if all immigrants, but I can speak up for the majority of immigrants. We just want to accept this country as our own, right? Canada Day, for us as immigrants, it's a time to reflect on how much this country and the people in this country fought for, right? The rights in place especially for newcomers, and how easy it is for newcomers to get settled in Canada, right? It's a time to reflect on how fortunate we really are. That not many countries like Canada are so accepting, and I think we need to really truly grasp that idea that Canada is such an inclusive country, and it's really one of a kind country. So.
Victor Santos Cardozo, originally from Honduras, he and his family became Canadian citizens earlier this year. Now let's go to the phone lines. Trent is in Saskatoon. Hi, Trent.
Hello.
So what does the flag mean to you, Trent?
Well, I've got a little story that I wanted to relate. I have great pleasure in making little free libraries, and I've done quite a number around Saskatoon, and the library part has gone fantastic. And many, many years ago, I started thinking it would be kind of fun to have a flag on this as well. So I would make a flagpole, put it on the little free library, and I'd get maybe 5x7 or a little bit larger flag, and I figured out a way to make it so that the flag would spin in the wind. And then one time, one of the libraries, the flagpole was completely ripped off and gone, and I found it in the back alley a few weeks later and put it back up. And then another flagpole I had at the Little Free Library at Delish they stole the flag, and then I put another one up, and then someone came and they took the flag pole and just completely broke it off and damaged the base of the library. So I thought, well, this is really annoying. So I waited a couple of months and I turned another whole flagpole, bought the flag, put it up, and within 24 hours it was gone again. The flagpole was like it seemed to be full of anger. The flagpole was really damaged and pulled right out of the wood, and it would have taken some effort to do that. Same thing happened on the one right in front of my house here a few weeks ago. And so I feel kind of defeated. I feel like I just am not going to put the flagpole on any more little free libraries. And I'm really sad about that. I don't understand where the anger is coming from that makes people do that. And so the story is really how that is disappointing to me. It doesn't affect my view of this incredible country that we live in. We won the lottery just by being born in Canada is how I feel. And so anyway, that's my thoughts I wanted to convey.
Right. Thanks, Trent.
Okay.
Thanks very much. Okay. Heather, I want to talk a little bit about the history of the flag. And as some of our callers have pointed out, it might be one of the most recognized flags in the world. But as far as flags go, it's pretty young, some 60 years. When did the Canadian flag as we know it come to be, and why was there a desire for a new flag at the time?
Yeah, that's really interesting. So it was 65, as far as I know. And quite frankly, I remember I was a little girl, and I remember this huge sort of fuss over, you were either for it or against it, right?
Yeah.
And but I from my understanding is that in fact when Canada became Canada and then fully independent from UK, its flag was still referencing its colonial status. So the 60 flag in 65 was a quite a striking design. Came from Preston at RMC, was adopted, I think, by a committee, and it was Pearson, wasn't it, who really sort of cultivated the desire for a new flag. And so when it came, it was also that. Again, looking back, that moment, I think in Canada, the sort of heady days of Canada really feeling that it was, it was something. We had Expo 67. We had a really sort of a nationalist period. In Canadian studies, we look back and talk about this nationalist sort of, new sort of sense of Canada and identity that was developing in the 60s. And the flag, I think, came with it. But it's interesting because, the flag had evolved even before that. And so when we think of a flag, we often think a flag has to be something that's centuries old and that it's never changing. And I think that for me, what's interesting about this history of the Canadian flag is that I think there is a potential that as our understanding of what Canada is changes, there's no reason why the symbolism on our flag couldn't change too. And I don't mean a new, totally redesigned flag that has nothing to do with the flag that we have now. I rather like it. I think it's a striking design, right? I think most people say, and the caller said it's iconic. It's so easy to know that's really striking. And I happen to really like the flag. But I think we have to remember that, this is an evolving thing. And as society changes and ideas change, it's okay for, you to change some of the symbols. You don't have to have a new flag. You might want a new flag. You might want to just put something on it that's a little different. If we, I'm just going to put it out there that if we talk about reconciliation, I mean, it might be in our conversations with reconciliation that there might be another way of representing Canada that is we haven't thought of that could be inclusive. I don't have any idea. I am not offering ideas, but I do think we do have to remember it is a young flag, and some flags don't last centuries. And we've tended to see our flag evolve as our society has evolved and our understanding of ourselves has evolved.
Okay, I want to bring in our next guest. Carrie Benjo is a longtime journalist and editor of Eagle Feather News, and she says her feelings toward the Canadian flag and Canada as a whole have changed in recent years, and she's on the line now to tell us more. Hi, Carrie. Carrie, how has your perception of the Canadian flag shifted over time?
I think the shift came right after the discovery at Kamloops. I was at my daughter's graduation, and they allowed for a moment of silence for the children that didn't make it home from residential school. And right after that was they played "O Canada," and they had these images of beautiful Canada on the screen. And right there in that moment, I sat down because it just brought home the reality that that is the Canada everybody else gets to enjoy. The Canada that I see is much different. We live in third world conditions in this really vastly beautiful, rich country. And prior to that point, I was proud to be a Canadian, and I referred to myself as a Canadian. And I realized that I am separate from Canada because my experience is completely different. I listened to the young man speak about how Canada is welcoming, Canada is freedom, Canada is this. The Canada I know, we still have an Indian Act. Our leaders are tied. They can't progress further than what the Indian Act allows. I have to be registered. I carry a number. My children carry a number. And that is not the freedom that young gentleman is speaking about. That's not my Indigenous experience. The experience I have is completely different, and it's really sad because we do live in a beautiful country, yet 5% of the population live in conditions that many flee from. Our housing, our water, our education. There's such an incredible gap between mainstream and First Nations that it just makes me sad that Canada allows this. Last year, Canada's revenue was, I think, $280 billion. We make up 5% of the population. You know, if we had 5% of that $280 billion, that's what, $14 billion. The transfer payments the federal government gives to First Nations is $780 million, and that's split between 634 First Nations across Canada. So when you whittle that down, that's very, very little. So we live on pennies compared to the rest of the governments. Like, every First Nation is a First Nation. They see themselves as sovereign, but yet we don't have the economic means to be sovereign, and our hands are tied because of this Indian Act. It's the oldest piece of government legislation still in place. I grew up in an era of segregation, and that is my reality. And so my idea, my patriotic duty, the Canadian flag, it's not there anymore. I still love Canada, the country.
Carrie, I'm curious because after the discovery at Kamloops of the unmarked graves, the government ordered the Canadian flag to be flown at half-mast, and it was for quite some time. And there was quite a bit of criticism of that move from opposition political parties and others. Some saw that as a small but meaningful gesture of reconciliation. What do you think?
It was a nice gesture. A true act of reconciliation is maybe closing that gap that currently exists. I talked about between First Nations people and the rest of Canada. That is a true act of reconciliation. Having our culture, our history included within Canada's history, taught to every Canadian so that they understand my reality and the reality my children grew up with. That would be true reconciliation. Right now, it's all just optional. You know, people can learn about the treaties. They can learn about this and they can learn about that, but it's always optional. It's not included in the curricula. Like, there were so many people when the graves were discovered that they were saying, we didn't know about residential schools. Well, how come we didn't hear about it? And then that's the reality. There is so much to uncover when it comes to Indigenous people, and our history is hidden. And people wonder why we're angry, why people get angry, why people maybe rip down the flag when they see it. It's because, we have not been treated fairly in this country, and we have allowed, through our treaties, for everybody to prosper, yet we see no prosperity.
Can you see a time, Carrie, or can you see a series of events that would lead to you being proud of the flag again?
I think when I see true reconciliation happen, right now I see it being led by Indigenous people, and we have nothing to reconcile. It's everything that was put onto us, and we're the ones that have to lead reconciliation. I think reconciliation comes from the individual, and when I start to see us being treated fairly, then maybe I will become proud of the Canadian flag again. But I doubt I'll see it in my lifetime.
All right. Carrie, thanks so much for the conversation. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Okay.
Carrie Benjo is editor of Eagle Feather News. She attended the last Indian residential school in LeBret and has been working as a journalist for decades. Heather, now, as I mentioned to Carrie, after the discovery of the unmarked graves at Kamloops and Cowessess and elsewhere, the government ordered the flag flown at half-mast, and it was for quite some time. And as I mentioned, much to the chagrin of some, it was openly opposed in Parliament. You wrote that the Canadian flag has been and can be used to reflect reconciliation. How so?
I think that's one example, but I actually think it's the conversation. I think it's being open to discussing in ways that are sincere and inclusive why the flag is not shiny and bright for Indigenous peoples, many of the Indigenous peoples in this country, and to understand the validity and to support and bring forward that perspective so that we can indeed work towards resolving some of these problems, because reconciliation isn't something Indigenous people need to do. It's something that non-Indigenous people need to do, because we need to develop some self-awareness, and we need to really put ourselves in other people's shoes. And I think that the flag, whether it's flown half-mast or not, it's a gesture. But I think the bigger piece are these conversations, and I think that we need to have them, and we need to have them in ways that we can talk to each other. And I think we need to be open to understanding those experiences, right? So I think the flag, I think it can be a useful tool to and way to create a process of discussion.
I want to read this email we received earlier from Tanya and get your thoughts before we run out of time. Tanya writes, I think a lot of people feel like the flag has been co-opted by the right wing, and waving it now displays allegiance with certain viewpoints, which I understand. But I don't personally feel. Perhaps my viewpoint is colored by my strongly held professional and personal belief in freedom of expression and intellectual freedom. The idea that the trucker rally used the Canadian flag didn't bother me. Rather, I felt that our flag should represent the freedom to disagree, the freedom to make your views known, the freedom to ask government for answers or express disapproval of government action. I don't need to agree with their statements to agree with their right to make them. For me, as a Canadian, that freedom is so valuable and globally so rare. I love my country with all its messy, opinionated form. Heather, before we run out of time, do you think any symbol, a flag included, can ever truly speak for an entire nation? And can it actually unite Canadians anymore?
It will always speak for a segment, but I don't think it could ever speak for an entire experience. Until the entire experience of a country is the same, and I'm not sure where we're going to find a country that has no, issues of social injustice or division or different ways of thinking. But I think that said, I think that we're in a very I think the conversation that's been started, I think that goes back to Commission for Truth and Reconciliation with all its the fact that we haven't actually implemented many of the calls for action. I don't think the fact that there might not be one symbol that everybody says that's my experience. I don't think that should stop us from taking this moment to use our discomfort that maybe the Freedom Convoy brought to the forefront, to use it as a way of addressing some of these issues. Will we ever have a perfect flag? I don't think we could, but I think we could have one that maybe is less hurtful. Because the last thing I'll say is just that, and this is my personal opinion, but this flag when it came in 1965 was supposed to, in one sense, mark the end of Canada's era of colonization. And I think that we know better now. We know that colonialism is alive and well, and it's understood in different ways. And that I think maybe whether a symbol may not fix it, but a conversation around a symbol is important.
All right. Heather, thank you so much for your time and expertise today.
Thank you. Thank you.